Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming and more Wilds talk. Today we're going to bounce around a few different topics, things with the August patch, general Wilds details I want to talk about, and just some stuff to do with Title Update 3 and of course Omega. So let's get into it. We begin with Omega itself, which is essentially a world-traveling, reoccurring character in the Final Fantasy series. An ancient civilization that essentially turned themselves into technology themselves, created this unbelievable weapon to deal with the dragons. Omega is ultimately a sentient life form that shows up throughout the Final Fantasy series in many different forms, but the most common one you see is the one that we saw in that teaser, the four legs in the center, which almost takes on a beetle in appearance. In Final Fantasy XIV, where this collab comes from specifically, it also had a few interesting other details, like the ability to generate life forms, which was used to force the players to deal with old Final Fantasy bosses, or transform itself. So you see it turn into humanoid form when it's trying to recreate itself as the Warrior of the Light, the hero, you, the player. A big theme and story with Omega then, at least in Final Fantasy XIV with the Raid series and beyond, is that Omega, it wants to understand. It doesn't really get this trait of the Warrior of Light, able to go well beyond reason, function, above what should be possible. After the Omega raids, it essentially takes on a toy form and travels the world with a character called Alpha, further trying to understand things. When we see it in the teaser, it's analyzing the hunter, and so I think it's very likely that it's going to see the potential of the hunter, the unbelievable resolve, and of course, challenge us. The big question right now then is, will it just be this base form? Will it transform? Will it create other life forms that attack us? People are actually hoping we see it transform into, say, an old fan favorite that's not currently in Wilds. Most popularly noted will be the Celtus Queen. So if it created a different form of something like a Celtus Queen, or turned into it, both would be possible, at least lore-wise. But what does seem the most likely is the fact that it's going to at least have this beetle form initially, if not the whole fight. And very likely we'll be dealing with the whole starboard and larboard concept, which is less complicated than maybe it sounds. It basically has an attack in the raids where it's like starboard or larboard, which essentially means it's going to cut half the area and do a big burst of damage. And as it's casting the skill, it actually warns you above the enemy model. So basically, wherever the head is, facing the direction that Omega is looking, starboard's on the left, larboard's on the right. But obviously it's going to spin around and flip a lot, so you have to first consider where's the head. Since we had this tweet referencing that old mechanic, I think it's extremely likely that at very least we're going to be dealing with that mechanic, maybe for the initial part of the fight or throughout it. Now, obviously, a big question around Omega right now is what is going to be the gear? What are we going to get from this fight? But if we look back at the Behemoth fight, we do kind of expect, especially with Title Update 3 as well, some serious power creep at this point. With the Behemoth fight, we got the Draken set, which was heavily meta at the time. What is it going to look like? Well, the Behemoth set, the Draken set, was literally just the Dragoon job from Final Fantasy XIV. And so they gave it the insect glaive to go with it. People are a lot more hopeful that there's going to be 14 weapons this time because that makes complete sense. So it does seem unlikely that we'll see like just a new job represented and its weapon. I referenced before that there is the job that they show in the Final Fantasy XIV version of this collab trailer, where it is indeed the Viper, which uses two blades and then it combines them into a glaive. So obviously that could work for dual blades and insect glaive, and the armor set itself for the Viper just looks awesome and would fit really well in Wilds. However, that wouldn't really work for all 14 weapons, would it? So maybe it's more of the Omega raid sets in Final Fantasy XIV. If you're unaware, there's a bunch of different sets that you get per raid, because there's a lot of different types of classes. So the aiming set is for your rangers, the casting set is of course for your offensive casters, and then you've got other sets like the melee, more armored stuff. There's the healing set, which is more of a futuristic cloth look. There's the maiming set, the scouting set, and finally the striking set. They could go for any of these or create some new version that fits this theme, which I think would work best. Obviously they could do a masculine and feminine version though, picking their favorite version that would fit the two categories. Maybe something like the fending set, which is the most armored, and maybe the casting set. Then when it comes to weapons and the visuals, they could also use the original Alphascape weapons, which obviously match this theme and have some sort of technology glow to them. Say the Gladiator, it comes with a sword and shield, so it would work for S&S. The warrior has a big battle axe, maybe that could be the hammer since we've seen axe hammers before. The greatsword is just an obvious fantastic choice, a lot of people are really hopeful for this one. And admittedly the gunbreaker could work for gunlance, which would be awesome by the way. There was the trident, which would work for insect glaive. The samurai blade, there's your long sword. But obviously ninja has the fantastic perfect dual blades. There's the omega bow, so go figure for the bow. And then other class weapons that probably wouldn't work great, like the cane, the codex, the grimoire, the omega rod, that kind of thing. So there is some overlap here, like some pretty good ones that would work for different weapons, but not a complete set for 14. They could obviously create new ones based on this theme and match, so hopefully that's what we see. Here's a quick talk on the weaknesses of Omega. What are we expecting? Well, there was the whole concept of thunder being its element weakness, but there's a lot of talk about how Omega, this whole thing, is adapting and changing and dealing with whatever it's having thrown at it. So I really like the theory that you're actually going to need to use two weapons, maybe two different elements like thunder and something else. Just expect dragon to be like the ultra resistance. You're never going to be able to use that since it is a weapon meant to fight dragons, right? So let's say it's like thunder and ice or something like that. That would work really well in Wilds, wouldn't it? Because you can swap weapons using the seikret. It's a pretty underused feature in normal gameplay, to be honest. So you'd need a setup for your weapon that's matching two different elements. And since that's something we're already doing in Wilds at a meta level with artian weapons, having two versions of the same weapon with two different elements and swapping between them whenever it builds a resistance, that's a really cool idea. There is discussion about whether it's going to be something we're going to bounce off a lot, like Gravios or something. So will blunt weapons be best? I'm thinking that's not going to be a concern. It'd probably suck mechanically. And there's a lot of talk about, will this actually be soloable? Because obviously there was that big reaction to Behemoth and how it was meant to be a group effort where you got like a tank and a healer and DPS. So being solo kind of didn't work for those mechanics. But of course it became possible. Based on that negative reaction initially, I don't think they'd want people to not be able to solo it in Wilds. So yeah, lots to consider there for Omega. Let me know what you think. But now let's talk about some varied other stuff for Wilds. Apparently, there's currently a bug with buffs where you can actually have too many. This was posted on the Reddit by the user iMrOmnicron. It was talking about how they're playing with, well, a group of hunting horn users, so there's a lot of buffs going on top of what else they were doing for buffs. This meant that their bar of buffs was completely full, to the point where it wasn't showing all of the buffs. So there was a first page, as it were, and a second page, and it would just bounce between them. But amazingly, when it would swap between the two pages of buffs, it would only have the ones that were currently on screen actually be active and functional. This is best seen with the immunizer effect, where as this player is taking damage and the immunizer buff isn't currently on the screen, they're not getting that restore effect. But as soon as it comes back on screen, that immediately works. So it would seem for that moment they may have also lost their food buff and all the other temporary buffs more than likely. This is a pretty crazy bug and one you probably won't experience much, but is definitely something they should fix. Here's one that Josh was just telling me about. Of course, we have the ingredient center where you can come and grab some rations every now and then. He was telling me that it actually physically stocks up, which I've never actually stopped to consider. So what's happening right now is this stand is absolutely full. It's quite literally overflowing. This is your tell to know that, well, you really need to come gather. As you can see, they're freaking out and calling for help, and a bit of apple there, random cabbage. I never stopped to look at this, but the cats are actually freaking out. This is constantly falling down. And the guy is like trying to get your attention, like, come over here, it's full, it's way too full. Got a huge delivery this time, because I've not been here for ages, so we have 10 rations picked up. And with that, it is now completely empty. Everything's back to normal and no longer freaking out. But this is one of those things where I must have walked past it countless times and I've never noticed that. Really cool detail. Right, there's something I wanted to talk about from ages ago by the Reddit user Solidus Dave, talking about how we have an interconnected world, which is how they've designed the map of the Forbidden Lands, and maybe what's possible for the future of it. Looking at the map, you can see how it's all connected. At the bottom left, we have Kunafa, with the windward plains around it. This connects, of course, as we know, physically to the Scarlet Forest, nicely mapped out with green there. We can see where that giant lake is and where that connects. This then has the river gorge that then leads us towards the Azus Everforge and the Oilwell Basin. But then this massive gap as you go from the Oilwell Basin to the iceshard cliffs, of course. This then leads through that ruined city into the ruins of Wyvria, something we covered in a previous episode. And then down to the southeast, which is connected to the iceshard cliffs, you have the Suja, the peaks in general, which is also where the arena is, and beyond that, the hub even further along. If we compare that to opening up the map itself, you can see that it's physically connected in that way. Windward Plains at the bottom left, Scarlet Forest just above that, oilwell basin to the right, and then you have this massive area with the iceshard cliffs, and that leads into the ruins, and then obviously all of the Suja peaks beyond that on the right side. And as we've shown in this series pretty early on actually, we have Area 7 in the iceshard cliffs, which allows you to get a really nice look at exactly what we were just talking about. We're looking over the edge, let's have a look for all the locations. So we know that we're heading like east and northeast, so we want to look down to the left here where you can already see the oilwell basin. Beyond that we have this crater that leads of course to the windward plains. And so just to the right of that should be the Scarlet Forest, where we see the top of Area 17 and that exact lake that was showing up on the map. Which means there is a huge area of no play where these craters with these lakes are. Or say this huge scar along the side here, or over there as well. So I really hope that we see an expansion upon the Forbidden Lands in that way, because there's just such a massive amount of terrain that is currently unexplored that you can just see. Another thing that I've wanted to talk about in this series for quite a while, but just not found the chance to, is to talk about the windward plains and the strange structures that are made out of rock here. Obviously we have the wind's gasp here, which is a big part of the map of the windward plains. It's not just like a physical thing, or say we've got like the area of Radar's Nest, or the fact that it is the very icon of the windward plains. But when the storm is occurring, it's lit up, powered like technology or something. And that's because it seems like the Wyverians actually designed these things, rather than it being a fully natural formation. The wind's gasp isn't the only one here though. These images posted on Reddit quite a few months ago by Crocodoc shows that there's actually multiple that we just are unaware of or can't normally see. Obviously they're flying around in the sky to be able to see this, but there's multiple of these shapes to create the same sounds and harnessing the storm in a similar way to the wind's gasp itself. If you speak to the All Harken about it, she says that these things were made to deter monsters, but obviously it didn't work big picture. So there's conversations around the fact that maybe Wyvria was using them to regularly create storms for different purposes, like the rains in the Scarlet Forest, as well as a kind of source of energy. Anyways, a fun little detail, if you're standing up here, which is one of the highest points you can find in the Windward Plains, just above the Oasis, or Area 13, you can see really far into the desert, and this is actually the direction where the sand tide comes from. Obviously we've all experienced it where the sand tide hits us and it's basically this cloud wall that smacks us. But thanks to this footage we can see what it looks like rolling over the hills from a massive distance away. It's quite intimidating and scary to look at as it collides with this player and overtakes them. It's just really cool what they've done with the weather effects in a physical manner like this. It'd be cool if you could have something similar with like the downpour, where you see the water levels physically raise, or there's like waves coming at you during its initial phase. I think the sand tide's my favorite transition overall. Now something I wanted to talk about in today's episode was Alma's artifacts, as shown in this post by Solidus Dave, who talks about the fact that Alma obviously collects artifacts, but her collection actually grows throughout the progression of the story. So we see her with her weird carved face one at the very start of the story. The Woodwards try and take it from her and it's her like prized possession. But if you look at the camp here on this table, these are all of the different artifacts that she slowly collected through your travels during the story. So obviously we have this thing from Sild here, once you actually reach that. This darker carving comes from a Zeus. We have the chimes, of course, from Kunafa, but there's plenty of artifacts here where I'm not sure where they actually came from or which part of the story. Obviously some she already had to start with, but say this one here, is that from the Woodwards or a different location? What about this jar down here? Maybe from Kunafa for the blue crystals. But it's another one of those progression systems that isn't important, pretty subtle, obviously relevant to Alma's character, but I've just never stopped to really pay attention to, even though this table got quite full. But yeah, that's the video for today. Just some different topics and theories and discussions I wanted to put out there. Let me know what you think. I'm going to be interested to see the response to this one. As usual, if you've got anything you'd like to add to today's topics or make a suggestion for the series though, let us know in the comments down below. But until next time, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thanks for watching.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.